Okay, guys, so welcome back to the second episode of Inside the Mind of Caleb Walker. I'm really happy about how the first one turned out, actually. I think right now we're currently at, I think, 68 views, which, I mean, it's not bad for starting out. And I got some feedback from you guys, and it was all good feedback. So I'm really glad to be doing this, and I actually have some pretty big plans for this. So, I'm also going to add a little new segment in. I'm going to call it Catching Up with Caleb. And it's about either what I'm doing or advancements in the podcast. So, for right now, Catching Up with Caleb is trying to find a real editor. Well, not editor, but like editing software. And then trying to find, or not trying to find, trying to get guests on. So, currently, um, I had some guests in mind. I can't do them because of the because of COVID-19, but the one guest I can, and surprising, it's actually my dad. But he has really great, really good, great. He has a lot of experience with mental health. He currently, right now, he runs a homeless shelter, and most of the people there have mental illness. Sorry, mental. Well, yeah, they have mental illness, but they also have addiction issues. So those two really tie in together. Even though addiction isn't considered a mental illness, except for gambling disorder, it's still very important and can have and has huge effects on your mental health. So for this podcast, I don't know how long it's gonna be, but I'm gonna talk about a couple things. So one, also, I should probably mention this. This podcast, near the end, we're going to be talking about kind of some serious topics. We're going to be talking about suicide, self harm. So if you are not so much prone, but if you don't like that kind of stuff, like you feel queasy inside um, when it's talked about, or if you have somebody that has struggled with those issues and you start tearing up or getting emotional about it, then I suggest you don't listen for that part of the podcast. I'll let you know when I'm going to talk about it, but basically, it's just about how to help somebody who's in a crisis. Not how to fix them, but how to help them. Okay, so first, the one thing that we're going to do today is I'm going to talk about certain support types for people experiencing different emotional states and mental disorders. So, um, those two are different. So, mental disorder is a chemical imbalance in your brain. So, like bipolar, schizophrenia, kind of illnesses like that. You guys know all the normal ones, but I'm gonna talk about how I've dealt with it while working at Walker Place, and if you guys are ever in the position where you need to help support them, I'm gonna give you some tips on how to support them. Now, I don't know how many of you would be in that position. I'm in that position, well, not right now, but I'm in that position usually every day. But maybe for you guys, it's not. But say maybe you have a family member who has something, like maybe you have a family member who has bipolar and is spending a lot of money, and you don't know how to quite help them. Because when somebody's in a manic state of bipolar, they'll stop taking their medication, they'll stop any treatment because they think they're completely fine, and it's really easy to get caught up in the energy of that. So I'm gonna give you some tips on how to help with that and other things as well. So I just got. Okay, perfect. So let's start off. I'm gonna start off with depression. So this is a big one. Um, a lot of people are admitted are what's it called are admitting to having it. I think the stat is about 300 million people. Yeah, 300 million people around the world have diagnosed depression, and that's only from the emergency records. So that's not any like family doctor kind of diagnosis. That's if those are like crisis situations. Excuse me. Um, so that's a lot. That's and it keeps on going up, which um, I believe there's certain factors in that. I think social media is one. I think um, certain impacts on today's society definitely has one. That's another topic for another day. But definitely depression and anxiety are going way up. So a really key way to help somebody going through depression is to constantly make sure that they are okay, but not constantly make sure, but not so constant that it seems annoying and that you're bugging them, because then that can cause them to really drive away from you, because nobody wants to be friends with somebody who's annoying. Um, but kind of just like every now and then, maybe like every twice a week or something like that. It could be like a little phone call, send a text, something like that, just to. And I know it's hard to read emotion over text, but just them knowing that you're willing to help and support them will help a great amount. And if you're if you're their friend, then that helps 20 times more, because nowadays I've noticed that teens would rather talk to somebody like their friend or another teenager rather than um, a doctor or therapist. Now, the reasons vary for that. It could be because they don't have access. It could be because they don't want to tell their issues to an adult. But nonetheless, it I see it a lot more nowadays. And this isn't a substitute for medical advice. Yeah, I should probably make that clear. So this podcast is not a platform for self-diagnosis. It's not a substitute for medical advice either, um, or anything. And this is not like a guide on how to be somebody's therapist. You're not there to be somebody's therapist. An analogy that I like to use is, imagine somebody's like a leaking pipe. Um, you don't want you're gonna be the tape that puts around it, or the, I don't know what it's called. It's like kind of like a glue that you put in the crack. You're gonna you're just there for the you're just there for the support. You're not there to fix them. You see, the therapist, doctor, psychiatrist, whatever, parents are there to replace the pipe, but you're there to just help stop the leaking for at least a little bit. And that's also very evident with the crisis, or not prevention, intervention. It's two different things, prevention and intervention, but I'll talk about that later. But back to, sorry, I went on a little rant, but back to the depression. So, key for helping someone going through depression is to constantly make sure they're okay. People with depression can go into a dark place, so you want to make sure that they are not going there. The best way to do this is to refer them to professional help. That's number one. As well, I'll mention this in the crisis, but if you do see them going into a crisis, call 911 or their parents immediately. That is a very important thing. Do not try and counsel them out of it. You can after you call 911 or their parents, but I'll talk about that later. Um, your help You help encourage them by planning events that are not too far away for the two of you. This gives them something to look forward to. So it can even be as small as taking a walk in the park or going for coffee. But providing an event like a short-term event that's not too far away, will help in the long run, because usually people with depression, they a major symptom is kind of hopelessness, or loss of interest in activities. Whereas if you provide something that will give them hope, or something that they can look forward to, like going out for coffee, then that'll definitely help in the long run, and it'll help them get better. Mental health is not something that you can immediately fix. It's not like fixing something physical or like fixing a car. It's something that takes a while. The brain is the most complicated thing in the known universe. this 3 pound what's it called? This 3 pound thing of like fluid and neurochemicals is the most complicated thing known to man, and we gotta we gotta treat it like that. It's not. We just can't like fix it just like that. Okay, so next, I'm gonna talk about helping somebody through anxiety. Now, more specifically, a panic attack. So, if you guys don't know what a panic attack is, a panic attack is when somebody gets very overwhelmed with, let's say, negative, well, not so negative, but very anxious thoughts. Their heart starts racing, they start sweating, start getting very fidgety, kind of things like that. Uh, it differs for everybody, but it can happen at any time. So, the best way to help someone who's experiencing a panic attack is to try and distract them with something else that's positive. That's that's after. That's one of the best ways. But first of all, um, you want to try and help control their breathing. So if somebody's having a really bad panic attack, like you see they're breathing very heavily, they're starting to sweat, you want to help try and control their breathing by using the things I used in the last episode with the worry coping cards, which will it'll definitely help because getting that breathing regulated will help the blood flow to your brain. It'll help getting you think more clearly. It's kind of like exercise. It gets the neurochemicals flowing. It'll help you think a lot more clearly. So, yeah. So first thing to do is get them to breathe in sync with yours. Now, this helps if you're calm. If you're also panicking and breathing really heavily, do not get them to breathe in sync with you because that won't help anything. But try and regulate their breathing first. Um, the next thing you want to do is try and take their mind off what they're feeling in that moment. So you can use any kind of distraction. Something that I like to use that I've used before when somebody's not so much having a panic attack but is very very paranoid at the moment. So I'm talking about people with paranoid schizophrenia who are not so much experiencing a panic attack, but their breathing is irregular, and they are worried about either somebody going after them, kind of delusion stuff like that. I would use a thing that I a thing that's called positive psychology prompt cards. So these are cards that promote positive psychology. So what's one good thing you did today? What's one good thing you saw somebody else do? Those kinds of things. It really helps them put the person in a positive mindset and will help carry the conversation. Okay, so next, I'm going to talk about bipolar and manic state. So, a quick thing if you guys don't know what bipolar is, bipolar is a mental disorder categorized by extreme mood swings that can last up to weeks, months. Um, so they can go really really high, which is called manic, or they can go really really low, which is called depressed, or depression. I mean, there's other forms of it like hypomania, which is a lot less severe. But for now, I'm just going to talk about regular bipolar, as most of you probably know. So now this one is tricky due to the fact that it's very easy to get caught up in the energy of the person. But whatever you do, don't encourage them in whatever they're doing because that could lead to a down spiral of bad choices. So I'm going to use an example of something. So I was talking with one of the people that I worked with, and this person was telling me that they wanted to buy something and try and make more money off it. And I didn't encourage him in it because I knew that this man was bipolar and that he was experiencing a manic state. So I didn't encourage him. I calmly questioned him about it and tried to get his thinking reasonable and try and calm him down. Because what happens in a manic state is people they start to become kind of delusional. They start to believe a lot of things where it might not be true. Like most commonly, people start to believe, or people start to um, spend their money irresponsibly. So they'll spend a ton and a ton of money on things that they don't need, and then once they're out of that manic state, then it's all down here, so downhill. So that's why a lot of people with bipolar, especially in a manic state, experience a lot of financial problems because they don't know how to spend their money properly. So that's number one. Don't encourage them in whatever they're doing, but try and calm them. But instead, try and calm them down and try and question and try and get them to reasonably think about what they're doing. And then the next thing that I do, well, I haven't done this personally, but um, I know people who have, is take control of their money. Now, this is only possible if you're a parent, guardian, if you're living with them, family member, kind of things like that. If they're your friend, you can, under, so, how do I explain this? This usually won't happen when you're a teenager. For bipolar, this is for adult. So if you take this knowledge into adulthood, that's great. Um, but if you do have somebody who is experiencing a bipolar manic state, then and if you have the power to control their money, then I would suggest giving them spending allowance, so that they don't spend all their money at once, but they also don't go straight into a depression if they don't have anything to kind of fuel that, if you kind of know what I mean. Okay, so next one, what I'm going to talk about is schizophrenia. Now, a lot of you probably don't encounter this like at all, but it's a good thing to know because a lot of people, they they judge people, they judge schizophrenia. It's it's been very not categorized, but it's been very I guess polluted by the media that people with schizophrenia are insane, they're crazy, kind of things like that. Now, the reason is because that's what sells, horror stories, kind of stuff like that. Tragic. People want to be surprised, stuff like that. It makes complete sense, but it doesn't provide accurate representation of mental health. In fact, 74% of people get their mental health information from TV shows, which is terrible because they don't portray mental health in an accurate way. In fact, actually, only 4% of people in the United States with schizophrenia are violent. That's a little fact for you. But so this one's hard because there's about 10 different kinds of schizophrenia, or not kinds, subtypes, and each one has different symptoms apart from all the common symptoms, which I'll explain in a different podcast. But basically, what schizophrenia is hallucinations, delusions. There's a bunch of different symptoms, but for paranoia, or sorry, for this podcast, I'm just gonna talk about the paranoia kind because that's the most common subtype of schizophrenia. So paranoia schizophrenia is when a person has delusions about people being after them, people are trying to contact them, conspiracy things, stuff like that. Um, so a good way to help somebody who not so much is experiencing a panic attack, but is having delusions about people being after them, things like that, is constant reassurance. Now, this definitely helps if you have established a connection with this person because a lot of people with schizophrenia have trust issues, or at least the ones that I've had experience with. Um, it's hard. It's hard for them because they're constantly skeptical. They're constantly on edge because of their illness. So if you build that trust, then it'll definitely help in the long run with helping reassure them. So, for example, when I was working, um, there was this person that would come up to me and constantly ask about if he was okay, if people were after them, his past, stuff like that. But I what's it called? I played catch with him a lot. So this is the person that I'm doing this study on. So this person would maybe come up to me. I think the worst day that we ever had was he came up to me 18 times and asked me if I was okay, if he was okay, in a 5 hour shift. So it's that's what I mean by constant reassurance. It's hard to it's how do I explain this? It's really hard to um kind of put up with that if you haven't been exposed to it much, which I was. But if you do that constant reassurance, it'll definitely help in the long run. Okay, so and the last one for this section is gonna be anger. So even though anger isn't a mental illness, it still has lasting effects on your health. So there's been a study produced. I really gotta cite these in my description, but it's from the book Spark that I've been reading. It's about how stress has long-lasting effects on your mental health, and not for the better. Uh, by what I mean, extreme stress, like um, like losing your job is stressful situations. Because actually, everything is stress. It's just on a scale. Because stress is just activating those neurons in a certain way. Every, Whenever you do anything, it activates those neurons in the same way that stress activates them. It's just on what side of the scale it is on, if that kind of makes sense. But so that means anger is on that scale, and it's pretty far to the left, which I guess left is stressful. So even though anger isn't a mental illness, it still have lasting long effects. The best tip for helping someone that is in an angry state is a lot like what you do for someone who's having a panic attack. So for that, if you remember, deep breathing would definitely help. Now, if deep breaths doesn't help somebody, because it it sometimes won't, it never hurts to try. Um, Later on, I'll provide a link to the worry coping cards in the description. Excuse me. Actually, I'll do that this podcast, but they help a lot. There's about, I think I mentioned 8, no, 12, 11, I think. Something like that. I don't know. But there's a lot of them, and chances are one of them will help. Um, So, first thing you do is try to get them breathing normally. This will help with blood flow and thinking clearly. Then, either try and resolve the problem between the person and whatever's making them angry. And if you can't, then try and sit them down and try and work out what just happened and try and make them think clearly. Don't provoke them. So don't poke around in their business, and don't say, "Well, come on, say it, say it, say it." If they don't want to tell you, then don't keep on pushing, because then that can lead to other bad things. Um, yeah, so you can do this by breaking down the question into why it made them angry. After this, after you can try and cheer them up by using positive psychology cards. You can use positive music, whatever. I've used it and it actually works pretty well. A very important thing, though, and this goes for everybody, or all the states that I've just talked about, it most likely will happen during anger, is make sure you, if they become violent, call 911 immediately and get somebody who can help. Because there's nothing that you can do in that situation. Do not fight back. Try and get to safety and call 911. This is for an adult. If it's for kind of like a teen, try and get to safety. Don't fight back. Um, and try and get somebody's help, like parents, teacher, whatever. Okay, so let's see, what time are we at? Okay, pretty good. For this section, this is where the warning is. So this section we're going to be talking about suicide and self harm. So if you don't like talking about that stuff, or you don't like listening to it, then this part of the podcast is definitely not for you. Um, Next week we'll have something else. Don't worry, but this is very important, especially in today's age, because it seemed to be happening a lot. So this final warning. Click off podcast now if you don't want to hear anything. about suicide or self harm? Okay. So this part is about crisis intervention. Now, before at the start, near the start of the podcast, I mentioned crisis intervention and crisis prevention. What we're going to be doing is crisis intervention. So this is how to help somebody if they are about to commit suicide or self harm. Um, we're not trying to prevent them from doing that. Uh, well, hold on, that was really badly worded. We're not trying to prevent them from doing that in the past. So we're not gonna be giving them any like therapy sessions or anything. That's not our job. Our job is to help right in the moment. Because I see this happening a lot with people these days. They talk to their friends, and their friends don't know what to do because they're not trained in anything. And this is definitely not training. Do not take this as training. But these are things that can help in a crisis. So, the number one thing to do is for self harm or suicide. If somebody does tell you, either in real life or on text is hard because it's hard to convey emotion or tell how somebody's actually feeling over text. But if they do tell you, the number one thing to do is to ask if they are safe. Now, what this means is making sure that they, like for self harm, they don't have a blade or anything like that, or they're not going to cut. For suicide, it's they're not gonna like hang themselves, do whatever, OD, kind of those things. So if they do say that they are safe, then get talk to their parents, talk to whoever you can talk to that has a relationship with them other than yourself, who has like a personal relationship. If you know their doctor, if you know their caseworker, if you know their parents, then definitely get help. And also, a good way or a good thing would be to direct them to the crisis helpline. I'm gonna start putting the what's it called, the crisis helpline at the bottom of my description. It's going to be 211, helps people find the right community and social services, but it's also, or no, that's not the right one. Anyways, whoops. Um, but I'm going to put the helpline in. It's very useful. It's helped a lot of people, so I suggest directing somebody to it. Um, so that's what to do if they are safe. Another thing, for this is especially for self harm. Um, I have a pamphlet. I forget where I put it, but I'll probably talk about it in another video. But there's a bunch of self harm alternatives, like drawing yourself and drawing where you want to hurt yourself, or using a red marker on your wrists instead of an actual blade, kind of things like that. I'll talk about that in a later episode. But for now, tell their parents, doctor, caseworker, whatever, if they are safe, and make sure they get the help that they need. If they mention that they are not safe, then what you need to do is immediately call 911. You are no longer able to control the situation. You can help influence the situation, but you cannot control it. Um, so call 911 and call their parents, anybody. You can even call helpline. Call anybody that will have more training than you to help. Um, the next thing that you want to do is keep talking to them. Make sure that you give enough time for the for the for the EMS to arrive, parents to arrive, anybody like that. You want to so you want to give them enough time. You can talk about literally anything. You could talk about how their day was. Using the positive psychology cards would definitely help in this situation. Talking about anything that interests them. If they are telling you about this situation, you can assume that you are a pretty trusted friend, unless otherwise. If otherwise, then I don't know what that alternative would be, but it still stands in the same way. Call 911, parents, whatever, whoever you have access to. But but definitely keep on talking to them until EMS or parents arrive. That is number one thing, and then they'll take over. So like I said before, it's not your responsibility to fix them, but it's your responsibility to help them. So there's two different things. So it's a therapist, doctor's, psychiatrist's job, even parents' job to try and fix them. It's not your job. You do not have any kind of training unless you do, which in this case, I don't know why you're really listening to this podcast because you kind of already know everything. But um, but if you don't have training, then you can't do anything other than try and help in that situation. You're not their therapist. You're not their doctor. So those are some very important things. And if you are a trusted friend, then that makes it all better because then you can help even more. I think, and actually, the next podcast I'm gonna mention on how to build those connections. Really great ways to not only build friends but build really deep, trusted friends. So that's it for crisis intervention. How long have we gone? Okay, yeah, we've gone. Yeah, wow, we've gone pretty long. Um, so that was it for this podcast, guys. Thank you so much for listening. Um, if you made it this far, then good job. I mean, I don't think a lot of people made it this far. Like when they see the like the 30-minute timestamp, they get all scared and hide back and hide because they don't want to listen to it for this long. But if you did listen this long, I'm glad, and this is good information to know. All this information that I tell you um, won't necessarily work. Like everybody's neuroscience or everybody's brain is different. Some things might work perfectly, some things might not. But these things definitely do not hurt to do, especially the worry coping cards and the crisis intervention. The calling 911 is the most important thing you can do. In any crisis situation, 911 is where you want to go. Okay, guys, so again, thank you for listening. I'm very sorry about the watermark in the top. I wish I could fix that. I can't because WeVideo is being stupid and wants to charge me like $50 and quarantine, no job. Yeah, can't really do that. But I'm gonna try and make it a lot better. As I said before, I'm gonna try and have more guests on. I think in a couple of episodes, I'm gonna try and get my dad on and talk about his experience with running the group home and currently his experience with running the homeless shelter. So thank you for watching, or thank you for, whoops, thank you guys for listening. Hope you guys have a great day. Bye.